Move into the sixth plenary session this morning. On account of the compression of time, this panel and the moderator have kindly agreed to condense what they're going to do for plenary 6, and I'm really appreciative of this concession that has been made. So, ladies and gentlemen, we begin the session by hearing from Mr. Afzal Abdul Rahim. Mr. Afzal Abdul Rahim is the Commander-in-Chief of dotCom. The profile given to me says this: he is an engineer by training and sells broadband for a living. And also, Afzal is actually a licensed commercial pilot. So let's hear from Commander-in-Chief dotCom, Mr. Afzal Abdul Rahim.
Good morning, assalamu alaikum. We thought we'd keep to the schedule, considering we stand between you and lunch. And I kickstart a conversation starter with respect to our panel, which will sit in just a few minutes. So we promise we'll get you out the door by sort of 12:15 or so. The topic that we wanted to talk about was to bring things a little bit home. Our feeling is that the emotive appeals that we've been hearing over the past few days and the sort of challenging environment of doing the impossible needs to be brought home to the eyes of consumers. And thus, from a power to the people perspective, our question is, what are the little meaningful things that we can do to ensure that we do our part in being conscious about our footprint as we start our journey, personal journeys towards self-sufficiency. So I'll spend maybe 3, 5, 7 minutes sort of talking a little bit about this before Mark, who's moderating our panel, will take over into the more substantive part and take questions from the floor. Next slide, please. The clicker's not working. At least I think it's not. Look, so just a quick wrap. We all know about the commitments. I won't waste your time. Reduce carbon-wide intensity by 45%. I'm talking about a Malaysian perspective, just to anchor stuff, if you don't mind me just for a second. And, net zero by 2050. These are things which are great slogans, and I'm very glad that governments have committed to these kind of commitments. But I, quite frankly, can't remember the last time a government or government has done anything good with respect to long-term goals, because of political opportunism, because of really, the political will and capital of people. And in essence, I think that it's time that we sort of ignore governments for the moment and not rely upon them. And more importantly, not take this dangerous step of abdicating our responsibilities to them. Again, from a renewables perspective, I always, I actually heard this from a young college student who sort of explained that the countries that we are in, the sources of, sort of renewable energy are as follows. It's the total amount of rainfall received in a particular country multiplied by the average height of its water retention ability for hydroelectric. It's the mass flow rate of air flowing across the continent or flowing across the country. We're obviously on the equator. Technically, we would call this the doldrums. We are far away from trade winds, and so we have very little, because of the Coriolis effect, we have very little ability for us to do anything about harnessing wind power. There's fossil fuel that we know a lot about, proven barrels in the ground. And finally, there's sunshine. If we just think about it from a Malaysian perspective, there's 322,000 square kilometers of area. Of course, we're not going to deforest that area to start putting up energy generation. We have 3.8 to 4 hours a day of peak sunshine hours. And really, if anything, because of our relatively predictable on a yearly basis, 3,200 millimeters or so worth of rain, we should be able to hit some of these targets quite easily, so long as we figure out the storage issue or storing power at the time when the irradiance is too high to generate it. So in short, whilst different parts of the world are blessed with the ability to have wind energy and so on and so forth, the equator, which is, if most of you know, is technically known as the doldrums from the point of view of wind generation or wind flows, has an ability to do so, but we're really talking about solar here for us. Sadly, we're trailing sort of quite far behind as a country insofar as the renewable generation share for various issues. Malaysia is an economy, and again I'll anchor on Malaysia, that is very much funded by our oil company, Petronas. A lot of the infrastructure, everything from infrastructure that you see to effectively the schools that are being built and effectively to the highways and the great ports have been funded through oil money over the years, mostly of course export, as I think we are still barely a net exporter, I think. And so at the end of the day, we have been blessed by funding our growth and infrastructure via fossil fuels, or the gains from fossil fuels. And moving forward is how quickly can we remove that. I recall when I was a young engineer working in a power plant in the mid-1990s that 65% of our generation was natural gas. Today we are almost 60% coal. And most of it is dirty coal. So we've gone backwards over the past 30 years. And I'm sure there are people in the audience, particularly my friends from the National Power Company, who will perhaps correct me on some of those figures, but that's perfectly where we trend. Governments must lead, but I'll be honest with you, I have no faith in government. I have very little faith in government. I have less faith in our leaders. I think they've lied to us for far too long. I think they tell us slogans when they want to, and I think it's time that we must take matters into our own hands. And I'm not talking about revolution here. We can talk about that at 3:30 in a separate panel in the coffee shop across the road. What I'm referring to is that I think there has been, and this is really the conversation starter for the panel, I think that considering that our governments are pretty much all useless, I think that there has been actually sort of complicit, we've been complicit in allowing this to happen. We've pretty much abdicated our responsibility for saving the planet to policymakers, who are typically self-interested. And at the same time, I'm an evil, greedy capitalist. We've also scapegoated a lot of our problems on corporations. And that's really where the panel wants to start exploring this idea about, are we, all of us in this room, and the people around us in the world, are we actually really hypocrites at heart in talking about the fact that we care about these things and, tear-jerking people, but really what are we doing? And at the heart of the question, something, again, a very young student asked me one day is, do you think that human beings live long enough to actually care about the environment or the planet? So if we all had the lifespan of leatherback turtles, we still have a few coming to nest on our shores every couple of years, thank God. If we lived to 150 years old, would we care more about the environment? Would we care more about the planet? And the problem is, and the answer is probably yes, we would. But because life expectancy is, between 70 and 85, typically in the developing to the developed world, perhaps things are not long enough for us to care. By the time I leave here, I'm still going to lead a comfortable existence. And I do love my kids, but, I may not meet my grandkids. So that's the existential question. Yeah, I'm going to skip this because it kind of irritates me talking about governments doing things. Quite frankly, I'm sure there are my friends in the civil service who are in the room and leaders, but I'm sorry, that's just life. And it's across the world, you guys aren't alone for being ineffective. Getting policy right. And we talk about policy. Our leaders attend these COP meetings and these summits, etc., etc. They come back and you really literally can't feel the difference in how you're looked at. And so we get into this point of view of looking at taxation or financially penalizing people for not behaving well. Well, it's got to be worth more than that. I'll skip this too. And so really I think that of these, I'll just go back one. So of these priorities that national governments around the world see, I think that number 6, or we think that number 6, and this is perhaps the conversation that the panel wants to have with you this morning, is about how can a people-centric approach to stuff actually be the biggest lever mover, right? And there are very simple, practical things. We've always talked about the supply side. We've always talked about emissions mix and so on and so forth. We don't talk enough about the demand side and our personal footprints. And we don't talk about some choices, sometimes subconscious, sometimes unconscious, sometimes conscious, that we make in order to do so. I would like to put it to the room that perhaps we are letting consumers off the hook. And there's been a certain amount of convenience scapegoating that has occurred, particularly in the past 3 or 4 years, of corporations for polluting the planet. Let's make it very clear. Corporations pollute the planet at the pleasure of consumers who help them create profits, right? So every time a corporation makes money is because they're selling and providing a service that one of you in this room has asked for and has in the back of their mind buried its implications on the health of the planet. And a very simple example of that, if you think about it, is how many of you here in the room have consciously thought about the implications of you backing up your iPhone photos to iCloud or Google Photos to Google Photos or Google Cloud less often than once a day? Because God forbid you lose that selfie because you lose that phone for a day. Now, if you think about simple click-through decisions that one will make, and this is not to start a contentious argument, it's purely to start a conversation surrounding it. If you were to think about the number of servers around the world that need to be refreshed and updated and the amount of internet traffic that would have to flow, I do sell broadband for a living. And if you look at the amount of data that's consumed, because you can't bear to lose more than a day of your photos, then I think we're all kind of hypocritical sitting in this hall. I urge you to, one of the things you can do almost immediately is to change the settings on your phone to say that I'm only going to update my photos or back up my photos once a week. If people in the world updated their photos, backing up their photos once a week, think of the hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of servers that could be retired in data centers around the world, and think about the amount of power that would save. Save a penguin or two from starvation or a polar bear from starvation. It's as simple as that. But we don't think about it because, maybe we don't care. Maybe this is all lip service to us. But there are simple things that we can do. Is it really that difficult for you to delay your need for instant gratification, to require that your YouTube spinning wheel of death only spins for 3 milliseconds before your video streams? Or to watch everything in high definition? There are implications on power usage and usability across the world. We don't really care because we are addicted to the concept of instant gratification. Newer, younger generations perhaps a bit more than old fogies like me. And so we've scapegoated the corporations for emitting, but really they're emitting because we really want them and like them to emit, because we cannot ever imagine a future where we don't gratify ourselves in an instant. And this is something that the panel would like to discuss, talking really about the fact that we have abdicated our responsibility as individuals to think about it. In the very short conversation that we had this morning before coming up here, we talked a little bit about what are the little things in Malaysia, in your own home. There is this new wave. I don't know, I would think that at least half of people in this room, if you live in Southeast Asia, now have this wonderful thing called an instant water filter in your house, because quality of water, piped water, is pretty poor. People don't realize that there is effectively a permanent boiler allowing you to make, coffee, tea, baby milk even at different temperatures, and a permanent cooler sitting in these filters in your home. So that when you press a button, you can get a glass of cold water. So that when you press another button for the 4 times a day, you can make some coffee. But these are 600-watt boilers and 300-watt refrigerant systems. There's a cost implication of that we think about, but we're not thinking about, imagine, of the 7.5 million homes or so in this country at least, what the implications are on that, on footprint. So the question is, do we really care? Finally, it's really personal behaviors that will move the needle more than anything else. And it's not about buying a 5-star energy rated fridge as opposed to a 3-star energy rated fridge. It's not about going online to see which company is making luxury handbags from recycled plastics. It's not about us penalizing or greenwashing people. It's about looking intrinsically to our behaviors for what we can change. There is a very clear path in this country, 322,000 square kilometers of land, 4 hours of peak sunshine hours a day, for us to go through a journey of self-sufficiency. Our kinetic movements on the road, in the air, on trains or public transportation is probably beyond our scope to self-generate. And we'll talk a little bit about EVs in our panel at 4:30 for those of you who are interested, where we bring the message home later on in the breakout session. But it really is time to shift the conversation to the demand side and put the consumer and people on the dock. With that, I would like to invite Mark to introduce the other members of the panel as we start this conversation. So not thank you just yet, because that means we've ended our session. Thank you. And a quick introduction. Mark is no stranger to planetary health, sustainability, and all things good. He's currently working for the very technologically advanced industry of what were firms doing auditing and assurance, called Ernst & Young, or EY as it's known now. And over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Afzal, and morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our, I believe, 6th panel discussion of the conference, and this one on the really important topic, as you've been saying, about how do we empower people through the energy transition, and in doing so, make sure we make this transition just and fair for everyone in society. I've got the very great pleasure of moderating this session and with my distinguished panelists, and I would like to invite our colleague and friend from Singapore, Mr. Kavickumar Muruganathan, to join us remotely. I believe he will be making an appearance shortly. Is Kavik able to join us on Teams? Well, whilst we wait for Kavik to join us, I'll also introduce the rest of the panelists that we've got here, physically here today. So please welcome on stage Mr. Chern Yuan, goes by the name of CY, I believe, Group CEO of Ynson Holdings. He skyrocketed the company's market cap and steered it to be a sustainability powerhouse all before turning 40, which is a remarkable achievement. And I also have the great pleasure of introducing here on stage Teoh Teoh is a trustee of the World Wildlife Fund here in Malaysia. She's an investment expert, champion Malaysia's net zero ambitions, and a former board member of a leading ASEAN banking group. And of course, we have Afzal as well. Please. Okay. Will we be able to get Kavik joining us? He's there, is he? Okay. Can you hear us okay, Kavik?
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Okay, right. What I thought we would want to do is we want to make this conversation as engaging as possible with you. So we would love to have your questions submitted. I'm sure you know the drill now. Please use your QR code, submit your questions, and we are going to consciously pause 2 or 3 times for this panel discussion to make sure that we actually do answer your questions as we go through. And I thought it'd be helpful maybe just to start by framing the conversation a bit and building on the presentation that you gave, Afzal. So I'm sure many people in the audience are aware that the UN panel on climate change has said that they believe that 70% of the decarbonisation objectives can be achieved purely through behavioural change of consumers. And when we go to these conferences in Malaysia and around the world, as you said, most of the conversation focuses on the supply side. And that's really important. We do obviously need green generation and reinforced grids, etc. But I'd argue that it's insufficient in and of itself in order to deliver the targets that we've got and to decarbonise the world and our country at the lowest possible cost for consumers. And I think that's the really important bit. It's not just about accelerating it, but it's also about making it just and affordable. And that's where we need the consumers to be empowered and to be involved. And it's what I call the last mile problem, to use a telco analogy, which is about how do we engage consumers and get them to want to change their behaviours so that we can decarbonise quickly. In EY, we think it's a really important problem, and we actually undertake a programme of research to understand energy consumers around the world. We've spoken to 100,000 of them over the last 3 years, 5,000 here in Malaysia. And what we find is some really interesting perspectives in terms of how consumers are thinking about their journey around decarbonisation and the energy transition. So I'll just quickly share a few insights and we move straight into the conversation if that's okay. So the first one is that actually consumers here in Malaysia are telling us that they believe that they are already doing everything they can to basically reduce their carbon footprint and to live sustainable lives. Now, I think we're probably going to have a different perspective as we go through this conversation, but that is the mindset of consumers today here in Malaysia. They already believe that they're doing everything they can and that they want government and the energy industry and the other ecosystem providers to help them do more if we want them to do more. So that's the starting point. The second interesting insight, or at least I think it's interesting, is both positive and depressing in equal measure. So we are seeing some new behaviours from consumers here in Malaysia where they will exhibit a positive energy behaviour. Maybe they do something to increase the efficiency of how they use electricity. They will then bank it and then offset it with a negative behaviour. So the best analogy I can give, it's like getting up in the morning, 6 o'clock, hitting the gym, going on the treadmill, running 30 minutes, burning 500 calories, and then going out and rewarding yourself with a pizza or nasi lemak or whatever your favourite dish is as a reward. And part of this, and you alluded to it, is that people don't understand the vocabulary and the metrics that make up the energy transition. And people can't relate to what a kilowatt is. How big is it? If I save a kilowatt, what does that look like in terms of other energy transition or sustainability goals? The third interesting perspective we have is that around energy consumer confidence. So we look at energy markets around the world, and what we find is that consumer confidence tends to be a very good proxy, and we know this from marketing and economics, around future consumer behaviour. So consumers who are confident tend to spend money, make investments, make decisions, and we need consumers to do that if they want to be empowered. And when we look at the energy markets and energy consumers, what we find is that there's a really interesting correlation between where a country is in its energy transition journey and how confident consumers are. So at the start, which is where we are today here in Malaysia, what we find is that consumers basically are very optimistic and very confident about the energy transition. Because who wouldn't want to use your analogy on government, the promise of clean, green, abundant energy? So this is almost a peak of expectation, or maybe uninformed expectation from consumers. When we look at countries like in Europe and maybe the US, who are a lot further through the energy transition, those trade-offs become real, particularly around the energy trilemma or quadlemma, and confidence falls significantly. And then if you look at countries who are furthest through, maybe Scandinavia, we see that it does start to restore confidence, and consumers can start to see some of the benefits in their everyday lives. So here in Malaysia, and I suppose this is the reason why we're having this conversation, we have the choice to do things differently, to empower consumers, maintain consumer confidence through the energy transition, because this is a marathon, not a sprint. So with that in mind, we'll maybe go to one of the first questions, and C1, maybe it's for you, if that's okay, if you can kick us off, which is, how do we get that balance between sustainability and decarbonisation, and then the other elements of the energy trilemma, particularly maybe energy security, affordability, and also the jobs and the economic benefits for consumers?
Okay. I think the journey just has to start, right? I think that's the key. And the world has seen as we can't do it too fast, nor can we do it too slow. When we do it too fast, certain groups ends up having to pay a big cost, and it just doesn't work. So I think the journey has to start, and then the speed is where we need to work. How fast or how slow, depending on supply chain ramping up and all, right? We personally invest in a lot of renewables, and the speed of how fast renewables has developed in the last 10 years is amazing. Today, there's the most amount of solar is installed around the world, and cost of solar is cheaper than anything else. So when you talk about consumers, I think consumers today, in the past, I think 5 years ago, people were wondering whether they want to install solar in their home and all, whether it works, right? Today, it's just cheaper and better, right? It can't be, and then consumers today have that ability to just get something cheaper and better. A lot of people talk about oil. We also do oil and gas. and then you talk about how difficult it is on oil and gas, on people not understanding energy, but understanding a barrel of oil for that matter. But it is so much more complicated to extract oil than to put a solar panel on the roof. I mean that's a fact, and which is why there's much more solar companies in China alone than oil companies globally, right? So I think the reality is it is because renewables is so simple, which is why it has the ability to ramp up much faster. And I know a lot of people talking about renewables not being able to ramp up, supply chain not there, batteries not there, lithium's being more expensive. Solar panel prices are all-time low, lithium price is all-time low. So I think that there is this opportunity today for consumers to actually get energy cheaper, better, and more sustainable, right? But what I think it lacks is, for Malaysia example, there is subsidies, which causes renewable to be a bit more expensive relative to oil. So that's on government policies and knowledge, right? You still go to talk to people and they say, oh, but solar is very expensive, right? Things like that, and that I think is a matter of education. I've said it for a few years now that corporates shouldn't even think about whether they should go to tap on renewable energy. Renewable energy, at least with some of the net energy meter schemes that Malaysia has, is cheaper, right? It's not about saving the planet. It is about being cheaper, right? So I think both corporates, consumers, and all today have that opportunity to move to something that's more sustainable and more affordable. And of course, it's not a straight line, and you just ramp it up really fast, right? But I think everyone has a role to save costs, and I think today the value proposition is there as compared to 5 years ago. EVs, for example, that we talk about, is there's so much investment in EV, right? Every year, I have 3 EVs at home, and one for each family member. But every year we regret buying the EV because next year it improves by so much. Or like iPhone 2, right? And then every new iPhone gets so much better, right? And you look at the internal combustion engine, it is just, there's not much investment in it. It just looks the same. It's not as efficient. So even on mobility today, there is the opportunity to move to something much more cleaner and cheaper. And the price is getting cheaper every day. Of course, there's a cheaper solution, which is public transport, which is probably the cheapest solution. But I think consumers have a wide variety of choices now. And that's why I'm personally more optimistic about transitioning, looking at much more supply chain being built every year on sustainable energy. And the price keeps getting lower. So I'm actually a bit more optimistic that transition will get there. Not because of governments, but really because of technology improvements and affordability.
Thank you. I heard some really interesting points there. So if I can maybe just play back what I sort of heard. One was around the education for consumers, a bit like I guess we touched on earlier. The second was around the speed of the transition, to make sure we get that right balance. We have to do it quickly. We all know it has to happen quickly. But given the Moore's law effect that you talked about in terms of technology improvements, etc., we should be able to do it quickly, but in a way that allows the technology to actually get better, more cost-effective, and therefore balance the transition affordability element. Thank you. So yeah, maybe do you have anything you'd like to add to that, or build on those points, or indeed challenge?
No, I think the challenge is that if you look back at point 6 of what Afzal put up earlier, which is all about what can we do. There's been so much talk about, this is what we must do to get to net zero, but it's actually the doing. And I think we've all forgotten that we've had all these wonderful experiences before. We've drifted, we've truly drifted. And I'm just going to spend 2 minutes talking about 2 journeys, but with a very simple and common goal. So I'm not sure how many of you are from Penang. I'm from Penang, and there's this market in Penang called Pulau Tikus, where as a child I would go in with my mum, we would have a basket, we would buy a fish, much bigger fish today than we see today. It's wrapped in newspaper. We will go to the store to buy fruits. We're not buying avocados or fancy blueberries or strawberries. We're buying papayas. We're buying mangoes from the nearest, orchard. Wonderful tropical fruits, and we come out of this with very little footprint. I'm not sure what's happened in the last how many decades, where we've now drifted to, walking into a supermarket with lots of refrigeration. And I was shocked just 3 days ago walking into one where I could not find a single local fruit in the first 3 aisles. That's where we've got to. So I think it goes back to as what you said, Afzal, is companies will provide what we demand. And if we're going to demand beautifully wrapped avocados in styrofoam, in a refrigerated environment, in a hyper clean supermarket, that's what we're going to get. And that comes with a cost. So I'm a huge believer of shopping local, getting the local communities involved. Why should we be, this is the blueberry test I have. Why do we have blueberries in Malaysia? Fine, if you're in the UK, it's blueberry season. We've got the most wonderful fruit. So these are some of the simple things that our parents, grandparents did, but we've drifted. And I'm just going to leave it there, Mark, as just something to think about. And this is without my sort of evil banking background hat on, and that's a separate conversation. But these are some of the things we need to bring back.
Yes, and you talked about the cost. I guess a lot of that cost is hidden. That's maybe the challenge, because it's not really sort of priced in, the true cost of those choices we're making, that allows us to make what we think are fine choices, but we don't really understand the implication of those choices. Which probably leads us maybe on to the second sort of area. And Afzal, you obviously touched on it. I'll come to you on this. But then, what is the role of policy to help lead us through this in a more structured way, and indeed maybe the role of government? And Kavik, I don't know whether you would be able to kick us off on this, but what role should policymakers and government be doing in order to make the transition just accelerated and to maybe make those costs more visible to us as consumers?
Absolutely. Thanks, David. And I think to some of the points that was mentioned earlier, I think today, I think we have a very different persona or a different characterization of the consumer today, right? The consumer today has evolved so much. I think he or she is more tech savvy. He has got access to information. He or she is able to make choices very definitively based on the information he or she has. So that's the consumer of today. And that nature of the consumer will continue to evolve as technology evolves. So I see very close linkages between tech and how we behave and interact with the markets as a consumer. To your point on policy making, definitely. I mean, there has been numerous examples of how policy making comes into the play to intervene in behavioral patterns of consumers, right? I come from Singapore and I've been brought up here. We tend to toe the line or come into line with when there is policy making, right? I'll just give you a very recent example, right? We've had, this sort of mandates around charging for plastic bags, right? Recently imposed 1 year, it's been about 1 year. And that has been massive, right? You impose that 10-cent charge, and that automatically brings down the use of plastic bags in supermarkets, and consumers bring their own shopping bags. But it took so long for us to get there as a country, right? One would have imagined a country like Singapore, highly developed, mature, having that consumers who are socially and environmentally aware to take that sort of decisions on their own. But unfortunately, that did not happen, and we had to wait for some sort of policy intervention for that to happen, right? So that is an example of how policy making comes into play and how it shapes and sort of also whips us into shape to align on some of our practices, right? So I think policy making will be a crucial facet. Love it or not, I think it will be front and center of countries, especially in this region, on how we pivot, right? So I think within consumer space as well, I mean, there are different facets of consumers, and that's why corporations pay a ton of money doing market research to understand consumption patterns, consumption trends, and behavioral patterns among consumers, right? So I think consumers today are generally more well-read, more tech-savvy, and more vocal in that sense, right? So the policy making will also have to shift in tandem with that, which means policy making has to really take into consideration all these factors, and whatever policy is being set has to be long-term, far-sighted, but it should not immobilize, consumption patterns in that sense. So it's a very tricky balance between, how much you regulate and how much you let the capital markets, the markets interact with consumers and, transact freely as well. So I think that's a fine balance, and yeah, that's what I wanted to, leave this point of discussion with.
Thank you, Kavit. So the example you gave us quite a nice one in terms of actually policy driving some micro behavioural changes in consumers and making you more conscious around how your behaviour is impacting, I guess, the broader environment. I don't know whether, Afzal, this is your favourite topic around government and policy, but given your previous comments, it would be amiss of me not to come to you for a perspective. I mean, do we need government to lead us through this? Is that what we need to give the frameworks from which we can, as capitalists, make investments and as consumers make better choices?
Yeah, so I think on the supply side, insofar as just picking up on what CY was saying, and I just want to point out that someone like CY, who actually is in the downstream oil and gas business originally, has been devoting hundreds of millions of ringgit a year to green energy pursuits and renewable pursuits, is an example of how, as capitalists and entrepreneurs, we see opportunities and investments are being made. So I don't think that corporations need to be led by the nose to basically see where profits and sustainable profits can be made. And I think there's more than enough, God forgive me for saying this, lawyers and accountants teaching us about the environment from compliance and ENG tables at, ad nauseum, right? Because really, they really understand the environment and get us to tick the box. I'm being a bit sarcastic. The point I'm trying to make in all of this is that I don't think corporations need to be dragged by the nose to provide alternatives for so long as there's demand. But somehow, as consumers, we talk about government policy. So we asked the question about, CY again alluded to the fact that we have subsidies. So, fossil fuel in this country is subsidized. And it's subsidized because we believe that it's a major component to costs. And it's subsidized because we're afraid of inflation, and it's subsidized because we're afraid of dwindling household incomes. So over the years, we have one of the highest diabetes rates in Asia. I'm a type 2 diabetic, for example, because sugar in this country is subsidized. We've taken off sugar subsidy a little bit and tapered it off. And so we've been thinking about how to maintain people's livelihoods and the cost of the living, and still by and large, as compared to a basket of our peers, it's still cheaper for your ringgit or dollar to live in Malaysia, so long as you don't travel outside, of course. But the point I'm trying to make is that we need to start thinking about, why do we expect government to guilt trip us into action? Do you really want your government to become your call to action, or the reason why you have a call to action? So I think the inner question we need to ask ourselves as consumers is that we're expecting, and really what we're leading to is punitive policy. So what is a punitive policy? A punitive policy is, one day we'll be measured in our own personal carbon footprint, and we'll pay less tax if our footprint is lower, or we'll pay more tax if our footprint is unnecessarily higher. For example, right? So that's the philosophical path that actually consumers are waiting for. Incentivize us to behave better. And I think that's where the problem starts. That incentivization to behave better is very different from being treated in a punitive manner if I behave worse. So the carrot and the stick in this case. And fundamentally, I do not think that we can rely on governments, and in particular developing country governments, to really be able to transition us well. I think it's going to be literally the corporations and people in direct partnership almost ignoring what governments are doing that are going to move the needle much quicker.
Can I just ask a question back related to what you just shared there? So is it about incentives, or is it about the perception of fairness, whereby what regulation does, arguably, is it creates a level playing field. So you and I are treated the same irrespective of context. So we incur the same costs, we have the same restrictions, whatever it might be. Is it incentives, is it financial, or is it just perceptions of fairness, or is it something else? What's your view? Why do consumers need that regulation stick?
Okay, so let's be realistic. We are Asian. Malaysia, I'm not saying all of you in the room are Asian, forgive me. We tend to be bottom feeders when we go to the spice market to, sort of trade and haggle on our prices. We are led by costs, right? That is really the sort of cultural context of where we are in Southeast Asia by and large. So I think that the incentives are really, really important. I'll give you an example, and I promise you this is not a plug for one of our services. We've got out to the market and soft launched a self-sufficiency energy solution or pathway to it in doing home solar. So we've now been inspired by what Ynson and CY are doing, and on his coattails, we're trying to build a home solar business. And the objection to people is there's a huge amount of capex that's needed to build home solar, right? And I'm going to have to spend the equivalent of, for most typical homes, $5,000 to $6,000 in order for me to build a home solar system. So you take away that objection by saying, that's okay, we'll provide it to you on a subscription basis, and we'll finance you this system and provide you all services with the system for 5 to 7 years. The second objection, so how much money do I save? I say, well, today you'll save nothing. What you save from your power bill, right? You pay us to pay for the cost of the system, but in 5 years' time, when you're done paying for the system, you'll save 50% of your power bill. And the answer is, well, I want to save money now. So you keep pushing this on, but really, if you look at it psychologically and emotionally, the question we have to ask is, do people really give a toss? Do they really care about anything other than a saving, or do they really care about their journey towards self-sufficiency? I think just to answer that question in that manner is, what is the raw emotive call to action? Now, they could have a child in the house, and the one thing that I'm happy about the millennials, if I speak about how I feel about the millennials, I'll be chased off campus. But the one thing I'm happy about the millennials, I think they're far better than the old fogies like us from a consciousness standpoint. And we see that the economic buyer in the homes is more the children that are guilt-tripping their parents more than the parents who actually care about stuff. I'm oversimplifying, but that's what we're seeing.
It's quite interesting, so that the decision-making unit within the family household is changing somewhat. So you talked about are people taking it seriously, and if the only saving is money, is that sufficient? Maybe Su-Yin, maybe we come to you. Are people taking this seriously? Is money the only way to basically get people to engage in either the energy transition or leading more sustainable lives, or do you have hope that saving the planet or making it easy for people can also get them to engage positively?
I think we all care, right? It's just whether we experience it ourselves. And I'll use an example. Hands up, how many of you are in a neighborhood WhatsApp group? Hands up. Yeah, it could be a village, it could be a small neighborhood. And I'm sure if there's a bag of rubbish outside your house thrown by someone else, there'll be an uproar on that WhatsApp group. And that's the easy call to action. But if it's somewhere else, 2 countries away, 3 oceans away, it's not my problem. So I think going back to giving power back to people in this decision-making is really important. So start with communities. If your neighborhood sees 2 trees being chopped down, there'll be an absolute uproar. But not when it's 3 jungles away. So I think we need education to make sure that you do understand, we all understand the implications of what happens when an area goes through deforestation, because it's instant reaction if it's in our backyard. So I think we are all conscious of it, it's just where it is. how many of us have truly gone into the jungles? Very few. To ask us to appreciate how we actually derive X amount of, oxygen out of it that feeds into your net zero, it's alien to a lot of people. So I do think we need to bring decisions back to local communities. We should be able to elect our local councils. Most of us can't elect our own local council members. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I think we need to bring the promise back to local communities, and actually this will then change the demand cycle, therefore impacting the corporates that we talked about.
Thank you. So, in effect, making it very real for people, very tangible in terms of their actions or their interventions and what it means for them and their community. Maybe we'll just go to some questions, either from the floor or on Slido. I don't know if we've had any yet. Oh, we have. My eyesight isn't quite that good. Okay, we've got, I'll just go from the top. So consumer behavior is complex, reflecting culture, policy, social economics, advertising. Isn't putting more onus on them just more greenwashing? So I don't know who would like to.
I think it's a great question. So the question, sorry, could we just have the questions back up, if you don't mind? Yeah, thank you. Consumer behavior is complex, reflecting culture, socioeconomics, and advertising. They're putting more onus on them on just greenwashing? No, I actually have a contrary view to that. I think greenwashing is us hypocritically holding corporations responsible for our demands. Right? So I think that when you basically understand, I think that when we give people the free pass to say the consumer behavior is complex, yeah, consumer behavior is complex to segment and profit from, but primal needs and a primal sense of responsibility isn't, is my response to that. Right? And it is just simple behavior, sorry.
Thank you. Any other builds or perspectives?
I think I look at a few of these questions, and all these questions sometimes look worrying. I think a lot of us that sit on the owners on corporates and corporations, a lot of thoughts behind perfection stopping you from doing good, right? I think we've seen a lot of people hit out at oil companies that try their best to install more charging stations, massive wind farm projects that they do lose money on, right? And what has happened, instead of encouraging, we hit them harder. And what it means is they just decide, and we see it more and more, that they just say, okay, I'm going to stop doing it, right? If people think I'm greenwashing, I'm going to stop doing it, and let the rest of the world do it. I'm going to start doing more, right? So I think sometimes, NGOs and whoever not, right? By having perfection in mind, we stop a lot of people from doing good. And instead of encouraging these companies, hey, you're moving forward, you're doing a bit more. What we've done is that we've said, hey, you guys are greenwashing. So what do? Okay, if I'm not recognized, I do even less. And we've seen that a lot in the oil majors today, right? That they are saying, I'm not going to care about it anymore. I'm going to cut down capex on fossil fuel. I'm going on renewable, and double down on fossil fuels. And they're getting so proud about it now, right? Because they're just not recognized for it. So sometimes I think there's a balance that NGOs and everybody needs to have that balance.
And maybe you would better give a perspective on that question around carbon markets, and is it just a marketing device for greenwashing for oil and gas and other heavy industry companies? I mean, is it that, or is it practically a step that they can demonstrate a level of commitment and direction of signal direction of travel? I mean, what's your view?
I think carbon markets is good because you're putting a price to carbon, right? And eventually people will account for carbon. Like nuclear, you have to pay huge insurance costs when you do nuclear plants, and that makes nuclear less competitive. And fossil fuels don't do that, right? Gas plants, coal plants, they don't do that. Having a carbon market enables a price to it, enables you to price things in a more competitive manner. But when when people start talking about greenwashing and say, oh, there's going to be flaws on this, there's going to be flaws on carbon markets, that's why I'm saying the whole idea is to start. you will get better rules over time. Financial accounting standards has been here for like nearly 100 years, and it still has problems and it's still getting better, right? But the issue is not starting, I think, right? And carbon markets, just to start it, you improve. You just keep improving. Things that don't work, you will weed it out. Things that work, we'll maintain. And over a longer period, when we talk about getting to net zero 2050, right? By that time, the carbon markets will be very well developed, right? The rules will be more robust. Tracking will be more robust, and it will be, like financial standards, many years down the road where we have today, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So don't let perfect be the enemy of good, I think is what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Indeed what you did say. So yeah, maybe if the second question there around how do you empower individuals when people might feel all the power sits with government or large corporates? So, can we really shift the needle by just empowering people, or do we need to change, I guess, the role of government, the role of corporates? Do you have a perspective on that?
I'm not going to ignore you, but I actually like the top question, so I'm going to ignore you.
Go for it.
Because there are 8 ticks there rather than 5 ticks. So I thought that got me thinking when whoever put that question up, how does the panel propose a low-income household make a choice between cheap, blah, blah, blah. This got me thinking, actually, if you are in a low-income environment, your carbon footprint must be pretty low. We could learn a few things, and it just reminded me of a trip to Sarawak recently. I'm not sure if anyone's been to Uluai, and these guys fish from the local river. They eat food from around the area. They also, you'll be surprised, they collect rainwater. And actually, their carbon footprint was extremely low. So we could actually learn a few things from there. So going back to your original question on baddie corporations versus individuals, I think going back to just taking ownership ourselves, I don't think we can change overnight the likes of Shell, the likes of what Time is doing, et cetera, et cetera. But what we can do is going back to simple things. Someone said refuse, reuse, and reduce. 3 simple things. And apply that to our individual lives, to small companies that we all support, and actually to force our local councils to think around that. Public transport, do we need fast fashion? Do our teenage kids need 5 of the same brand? Think about supporting local farm shops or local markets. So these are the things that are cumulative and I think tangible that we can all relate to. What happens with Shell and the big corporations, that I think we need our investor base to deal with obviously, now you've got these shareholders who are very mindful of this. I think we need to encourage that. We need to support NGOs because they do a lot of lobbying. Again, a bit of a plug for WWF. We do a lot of lobbying, a lot of policy support for governments. Support your local NGOs.
Thank you. And Kavik, if you can hear us okay,
Yes.
do you have a view on that first question around, I'm not sure if you can see the questions, but why should we empower individuals and corporates when corporates and governments have so much power to shift the needle?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think corporate individuals have always had the power to create that systemic change, right? Let's be very honest on that. And what I personally, and straying away from the topic slightly to take a bit of a macro view on this, is that obviously we are facing some sort of catch-22 situation, right? Where, individuals feel that corporates are not doing enough. So a bit of what we call the impatience, patience, right? So urgency, right? So it boils down to that nexus of, perfection. I think CY was mentioning about perfection and urgency, right? Like, how do we have a common ground on that? And on the side of corporates are trying their level best to also pivot, right? But when sort of, the issue of urgency is put on them, they feel pressured to make certain changes, and that's why sometimes they go down the slippery slope of greenwashing inherently, unknowingly. So it's a trilemma or dilemma that we've created ourselves, right? So I think for individuals, I think where possible, we take our action ourselves. We should not wait for governments to act. We should not wait for corporations to act. We should go back to maybe what we can envisage as primal behavior, where the roots are, taking charge of our plot of land, our areas, clean it up, ensure that we have proper, systems, practices in place, and as some of the speakers were mentioning, right, keeping our consumption patterns low, and that would necessarily manage the waste that we generate accordingly, right? So I think individuals can take more responsibility. I strongly agree that the not in your backyard or not in my backyard philosophy plays out a lot, but I think that's a mindset shift that needs to happen over time, right? If it's not in your backyard, you still need to sort of also, take responsibilities for certain actions, because it's for the planet, it's for the common good, it's for planetary health, right? So I think that's very important. So I think going back to practices that have served us so well over the last couple of decades, right, would help us tremendously. So I think it is those sort of practices and really taking charge, right? I'm glad that millennials are starting to do right now. So I really see them as a beacon of light and hope for the future.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for the great questions. We'll come back to them if you have time at the end as well, just to round off any last ones. But conscious of time, maybe we have a couple more questions. Afzal, how is the energy transition very practically impacting time and your company? Like, what impact is it having, and what changes are you guys making to better position yourself for the energy transition? You obviously talked about the energy subsidiary, but maybe your core business as a broadband provider.
Yeah, so I mean, we're still in the data center business, although we no longer have a majority stake in that business. And I mean, just to start on that and weave into a couple of the questions, data centers are some of the biggest polluters on Earth. We consume megawatts and megawatts of power, but data centers exist to serve consumers. Consumers want to store their photos, consumers want to send emails, consumers want to watch videos. I mean, recently everyone's heard about this new phrase of the AI generation, and generative AI and so on and so forth. Every time you sort of produce a yearbook photo of yourself when you were back in high school, or basically prank your friends by changing an image, there is a carbon footprint to that. And I don't think people realize that there are carbon footprint decisions to clicks. So
how do you make people aware of that? I mean,
correct. So I think that, there's a few things here, right? I think personally, and this is a very unpopular minority statement, I think this entire AI thing is a fad. And I think it's a fad because it destroys jobs, and secondly, dumbs down people, and thirdly, is speculative in nature because of speculative capital. There's so much money surrounding AI because there's too much irrational capital and over-exuberant capital chasing invisible opportunities that they're willing to, buy servers from Ynson and NVIDIA around the world, consuming kilowatts and kilowatts of power. How do consumers or how do corporations do this? Well, actually, I think consumers have to be conscious that there is an implication to what they click. People are going to make money from you because there's no implications on what they do. You want to talk about the ultimate greenwashing. The 4 or 5 largest content providers in the planet all have statements on their websites basically saying, we know who they are. I can't name them because they're my customers. All have statements on their website saying that we operate a zero carbon, fully green energy environment to provide you services. Nonsense. They buy credits from Norway and they pollute in Malaysia. Right? So if you think that that's actually green energy, then then you have something coming. From our personal behavior standpoint, I think that we are far more, we've decided as a company that the way in which we are going to undo some of the bad and dirtiness that we've done is to make the journey to self-sufficient home energy distribution or generation, easier for people. So sometimes you will not be able to influence consumer behavior because people like death scrolling on Facebook, not knowing that there's a carbon implication I mean, I'm just curious, how many of you actually think about how much your carbon inputs actually change, or your carbon footprint changes by death scrolling on YouTube and Facebook? Do you realize that with every scroll that you make, you're actually polluting the planet? You see, we don't think about it. And some of these questions are exactly where I'm coming from. Don't expect the corporation who makes money from your death scrolling to make death scrolling less interesting, because that's what makes them profits in the first place. Do you know what I'm trying to say? It starts with us, right? So maybe I need to go back and start, oh God, I can't imagine it, speaking to the wife instead in bed. It seems like an alien concept, speaking to your partner before you sleep, as opposed to death scrolling yourself to sleep. Anyway, sorry.
Thank you. One maybe last question before we do maybe final thoughts. Do any of you have like examples or stories around how climate change is impacting, or has impacted you personally, and kind of how that realization, maybe the death scrolling is a good example, but how it started to change your behaviours as individuals? I don't know if you've got any stories yourselves that you'd like to share.
I think we all feel climate change is real, right? It's really hot. No, and I think in this part of, I don't see it as much, but I know, you know, especially in Europe, when I was looking at pictures when I was in Switzerland just a year ago, and looking at just 5 to 10 years, just before COVID and after COVID, the same, to look at the glaciers in Switzerland, and it's just 5 years before and after COVID. Despite COVID not having a lot of power generation, I mean, it is a massive, massive change in the glacier. So I think looking at that, you know, it doesn't impact my personal life, but looking at that, it's quite sad to see what's happening. You know, just places that you used to go, and what's happening to the places now, right?
Yeah, you can start to see the real difference, unfortunately. Yeah.
Can I just rattle off some numbers just to put things within kind of perspective? And I'm sorry, I'm not very familiar with the rest of the world, so I'll just stick to my little country called Malaysia for the moment, right? So we know that our power generation makes it 60% coal today. Sadly, we're changing it, people are trying to change it, and we'll get there. However, if you think about it, our peak generation capacity today in the country is about 28,000 megawatts, right? So anytime we can produce 28,000 megawatts of power. Right, and that's what it is. Our peak daily utilization is about 18,000 megawatts or so, depending on who you ask, and I'm sure people in the National Power Company will correct me. So we have a reserve margin of about 30-40%. Okay, so just 28,000 is what we can produce, 18,000 is what we use at peak, right? So there are 6 million households in Malaysia, and there's at least 1 million households that can afford solar, either on a subscription basis or an outright basis, without really it putting too much a hole in people's pockets, at least on a subscription service basis. We have a net energy metering policy in place, which allows consumers who produce solar to store energy free on the grid. Free, right? And so you can produce solar during the day, store it on the grid, take it back at night, and at the end of the month, you, from a net energy standpoint, you get done so. And the maximum capacity that you can have for an NEM system is quite large. A standard size solar system is 5 kilowatts. Okay, just hear me out for a second. 1 million homes at 5 kilowatt kWp, right, is 5,000 megawatts for the 4 hours that it can produce this. If 1 million homes were producing energy via 200 square feet of space on their roofs in a tropical country like Malaysia, we could peak shave 20% of our daily demand. Does that not move the needle? For 4 hours a day, we could get 20% peak shaving of our national demand. Now, if that doesn't move the needle, I can't think of any, sorry, responding to some of these questions, I can't think of any government policy, right, or any government intervention that could move the needle as quickly as that. My answer is we don't do it because we don't care enough.
Thank you. maybe we're coming to the end of the session, maybe we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So, Kavik, maybe you can share sort of 30, 40 seconds, your final thoughts, key messages and takeaways.
I personally think that this conundrum will continue to evolve. It will take many shades and shapes. I think there will have to be trade-offs made. That's something that is a given. What are the types of trade-offs? Who takes or bears the burden of risk and externality remains to be seen. But I believe that the consumers will play a greater role, especially with the generational boom that would happen over the next couple of years, and they would start taking things into action, and they would basically be taking on the role of governments in some ways, right? Holding corporates accountable and holding their peers accountable as well for any climate or environmental anomaly. So these are my closing thoughts and philosophy on how I envision things moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavik. Yin, have your closing thoughts, please?
I think the sort of a key message is to get involved, as simple as that. Get involved in your local communities. If you see something that's not right, particularly with corporates, get your voice out there. And today, getting your voice out there is so much easier rather than writing to your local MP or whatever. Now you can just, click on your phone, send it out, and it becomes viral very quickly. So tech has given us this voice, use it. Also, the other thing is the resources available today because of this happy environment that we're in, we can actually solve these solutions so much quicker. So get involved.
Thank you, Yin.
I had to take the first question earlier on, since there's so many. I've got a power plant, I've got a solar power plant in India. 5 years ago, it started operation. Today, it's still producing the same amount of power as it was 5 years ago. So degradation was not really high. Rule of thumb degradation about after 20 years, about 20%, right? So it'll still produce a lot of power even after 20 years. So do you really want to make it obsolete after 20 years? You may not want to, because it still produces quite a good substantial amount of power.
And can I just jump in? I used to work for a gas turbine power plant, right? And after 20 years, if you only lose 20% of your wet efficiency, that's a great deal. So actually, solar panels are more resilient over time than the moving parts of a gas turbine.
Just had to do, but yeah, like my message is, we have to move ahead. Responsibilities to everyone. I think governments, corporates, consumers all have a responsibility to play. We are all in the same planet. We all live together. We have to engage each other to move forward together. It needs to be inclusive.
Thank you. Afzal, 10 seconds, final reflections? You're good. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions. We didn't get to all of them, but hopefully we did manage to address some of them. I'd like to say thank you to the panelists for their sharing their thoughts, perspectives, and I wish everyone a very enjoyable day at the conference. Thank you.